Free.
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 Will a candidate win the White House by offering us the most free stuff?
Collect up to $500 a month.
Never before have so many promised to spend so much.
We need to go tenfold.
We took care of the military like it's never been taken care of before.
We have got to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system.
How can you even keep track of their proposed spending?
$400 million in new science and technology.
No one I know has even tried to track their promises. So we did. Here's the tally. We added up each candidate's proposed spending. We limit our count to the top 5 in the election bidding. We break it down issue by issue, starting with education.
Triple the amount of money we spend for Title I schools.
Joe Biden's off to a fast start.
Universal pre-K. Free community college.
Plus, he doubled the number of psychologists, counselors, and social workers in schools. $78 billion total. But that's much less than what Kamala Harris would spend.
Giving the American family all that they need.
Harris would also make community college free, but she'd add on four-year public college and increase government's investment in child care dramatically and give the average public school teacher a $13,000 raise. Her total more than doubles Biden's.
Free college for low and middle income students.
Mayor Buttigieg rarely says what his plans would cost, but he at least proposes less than Harris.
You ought to be able to refinance your student debt.
He also wants the feds to give teachers more money. Assuming his plans like Harris's, that's a total of $87 billion.
We can make it work for everyone.
Elizabeth Warren would spend much more.
You'll be debt-free.
Some students will be, that is, but you'll be deeper in debt if Warren gets her way. She would forgive most existing student debt, make public colleges tuition-free, and she wants a universal child care and early learning act. She's in first place so far.
Eliminate student debt.
But Bernie Sanders would spend even more. He'd forgive all student debt.
We must make public colleges and universities tuition-free.
We're up to $220 billion per year. But Sanders also wants universal daycare and pre-kindergarten. So Sanders wins in education spending. As the only self-described socialist in the race, I assumed he'd win most categories, but I was wrong. He's got plenty of competition. Let's look at health care.
You cannot let people who are sick, no matter where they come from, no matter what their status, go uncovered.
Joe Biden would spend $49 billion to have the government provide a public option like Medicare. Buttigieg has the same plan.
I would call it Medicare for all who want it.
All the Democrats also want to give Medicare to people who came here illegally.
We have got to pass a Medicare for all single-payer system.
Bernie's plan would cost even more.
Under our plan, people go to any doctor they want, any hospital they want.
Sanders says it would cost $30 to $40 trillion over the next 10 years. $3 trillion per year.
I'm with Bernie on Medicare for all.
Medicare for all.
So these three lead in health care spending, but something isn't clear.
Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan? All right.
The three biggest spenders also support banning private insurance, unless they don't. Harris co-sponsored Sanders' bill, which bans it. But then in The View, she said she would not ban private insurance.
And private insurance also, because that's what I have.
Supplemental private insurance.
Yes.
Then in the debates, she raised her hand to say she would. After the debate, she again said she would not.
I support the Green New Deal.
And how much will they spend on climate change?
I support a Green New Deal.
All the candidates except Biden say they support AOC's Green New Deal so they can pretend to be doing something about climate change. Republicans say a Green New Deal would cost $93 trillion. But we'll go with the lowest estimate we could find. An economist who likes the idea claims it'll cost $500 billion a year.
New science and technology.
Biden would spend less, but still a lot.
I would immediately insist that we, in fact, build 500,000 recharging stations.
Some candidates would spend almost as much increasing welfare benefits.
For every family that is making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a tax credit that they can collect up to $500 a month.
In addition to a tax credit, Harris also would have the government pay your rent if it's more than 30% of your income. And she'd increase food stamps for kids. Warren would do that too, and make an historic investment in housing. Buttigieg wants affordable housing, but gave no specifics. I'll assume his plan's like Warren's. Senator Sanders wants to increase food stamps, expand Social Security benefits, and guarantee everyone a government job. So far, Joe Biden has not proposed new welfare spending. So Senator Harris wins this round easily.
Working families need support and need to be lifted up.
I've been counting up the Democrats' plans, but the incumbent hasn't been very responsible either.
A $21 billion increase in defense spending.
Since Trump became president, spending rose about $500 billion. Trump did send Congress budgets that included cuts, but Congress sent increases back and Trump signed them. And Trump would spend even more. $200 billion for infrastructure, $8 billion for wall construction, and more NASA funding. How can we afford this? America's already $22 trillion in debt, $150,000 for every taxpayer. But at least Trump proposes less spending than the Democrats do. Finally, we added a grab bag category because 3 of our candidates have even more proposals. Harris wants to give $100 billion to redlined communities. Buttigieg wants $2 billion to expand national service. But Warren has the most planned. She'd require the government to buy American-made products.
They have to be manufactured right here in the United States of America.
She'd also expand the destructive Export-Import Bank, give debt relief to Puerto Rico, spend more on the opioid problem, and give $2 billion a year to apprenticeship programs. In total, we counted 50 spending proposals. We tried to include all of them and figure out the costs, but please, in the comment section below, tell us what we got wrong. Until then, President Trump has the lowest spending proposals. Biden's not that much worse. Buttigieg would double Biden's spending increases, and Elizabeth Warren would spend 5 times more. Sanders is even worse, but even the socialist was edged out by Kamala Harris. I guess that means she's the winner of Free Stuff 2020. No matter who wins, since all the candidates want to spend more, you taxpayers are the losers. The city of Dunedin, Florida wants to take this man's home.
Because I was tardy cutting the grass.
Jim Ficken's mom died, so he went to South Carolina to take care of her estate. City officials then started fining Ficken $500 a day because his grass had grown longer than 10 inches. Such fines add up.
This is a letter from the city attorney demanding $24,454.
Now the fine's up to $30,000.
That's asinine.
Ficken's neighbor can't believe he was fined so much.
Just for grass.
Because Ficken doesn't have $30,000, the city says it will foreclose on his home to collect the fine.
I was shocked.
The town says you're kind of a public nuisance.
I got everything fixed and taken care of.
But you only get it fixed after they send warning after warning, the neighbors complain.
I guess I'm kind of a slob.
Why don't you just pay the fine?
$30,000. Do you have $30,000 lying around?
In every instance that the city asked him to do something, Jim did it.
Lawyer Ari Bargle's defending Ficken against Dunedin.
The city has gone nuclear. $500 per day for the violation of having tall grass, and now he's facing the loss of his home.
Dunedin's politicians wouldn't talk to us. Instead, they paid $25,000 to this public relations firm to speak to the media.
The new PR manager costing taxpayers $25,000 for just 1 month.
The PR firm says Dunedin has no desire to impose large fines. Their goal is just to ensure that Dunedin's a high-quality community. But if the politicians only cared about the quality of the lawns,
they could have done what their own ordinances permit them to do, which is hire a a lawn service to come out and mow the grass and send Jim a bill for $150, but they didn't do that.
They could do that.
They absolutely can do that, but they didn't do that, and that's because they prioritize revenue collection.
They want the money.
It's pretty apparent that code enforcement is a major cash cow for the city of Dunedin.
11 years ago, Dunedin collected $34,000 in fines. Last year, $1.3 million.
I got violated for a lawnmower in my yard. They violated me for a hole the size of a quarter in my stucco. They find people that they can pick on, and then they keep picking on them.
Dunedin put a lien on her house. They say she owes them $32,000.
I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I've had because of the city of Dunedin. Just trying to think of what to say to them, just like I have them leave me alone.
The city is just a bunch of bullies, and they expect people not to stand up to them, because to stand up to them requires expensive legal help.
Ficken managed to get that legal help for free from the Institute for Justice, a law firm that defends individuals abused by government. Its lawyers, portraying themselves in this video as Western heroes ready to punish bad guys, say many cities now pad their budgets by imposing excessive fines.
The North Carolina city fined a local church $100 a branch for excessive tree pruning.
Private citizens are being essentially extorted by their governments and fined incredible amounts of money for really, really small violations.
And if you can't pay the fine, they'll take your home.
The City of Dunedin Code Enforcement Board authorized the City Attorney's Office to file foreclosure actions.
The City Attorney of Dunedin in the last year has sought permission to foreclose on 18 properties.
That violates the Eighth Amendment, says the Institute for Justice. It not only protects us from cruel and unusual punishment,
but right next to that in the Eighth Amendment is a protection to be free from excessive fines. Our founders, they recognize that the ability to fine is the ability to cripple. And it's one of the ways, other than incarceration, that government can really oppress.
If governments can, they will. So we should be grateful for the Eighth Amendment. It protects us from excessive fines. And what's more excessive than politicians taking your home because you didn't cut your grass? A woman records what appears to be a live cow being pushed by a bulldozer.
And a bulldozer?
Yes, he's alive.
She was filming from public land. The farm owner drove up and confronted her.
You cannot videotape my property from public property.
Why are you concerned about being filmed if you have no problem, you think this is a legitimate business?
It is a legitimate business.
Utah prosecutors charged the woman with agricultural operation interference.
Am I free to leave or am I being detained?
You're being detained.
But she was on public land. They dropped the charges several months later. But what if she'd sneaked onto a farm to record what she considered animal abuse? More than 100 such investigations have been done. Activists pose as farm workers and secretly record the way animals are treated.
An animal rights group released this undercover video of the dairy farm. It shows workers hitting, kicking, and throwing young calves. We are not showing the most disturbing parts of the video.
Farmers upset about these recordings are persuading politicians to
essentially outlaw these undercover investigations.
The controversial ag gag law.
The sixth state to pass an ag gag law.
There are activists stalking farms to try to capture something that the public doesn't understand.
Kay Johnson Smith speaks for a farm group that supports the ag gag laws, though they don't call them that.
We would call it farm protection. Farm protection.
What about everybody else? Why do you get special protection?
The agricultural community is the only business community that this sort of tactic is really being used on right now.
I'm an investigative reporter. I can't do my job if there are laws that prevent me from showing things. Nobody believes it if you don't see it.
These activist groups want to eliminate all of animal agriculture.
Brittany, you're holding a dead body.
This group live streams its protests on Facebook.
You saw a dumpster with hundreds of dead birds?
Many of the activists stormed into the farm. Some stole some of the baby ducklings.
We were just able to rescue almost 30 baby ducks.
Others chained themselves to the entrance of the farm.
Later, the activists released this video of the 30 stolen ducklings, adding music and showing the birds running around, apparently happy. They stole those ducks after seeing this earlier undercover video of injured ducks at the farm.
Mercy for Animals says their undercover investigations have led to criminal charges.
Ag-gag laws often prevent such investigations, which is why farm states pass them.
A bill making it illegal to apply for a job in a farming operation under false pretenses.
But what about free speech?
Ag-gag laws chill speech.
Lawyer Amanda Howell speaks for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, a group that says ag-gag laws are unconstitutional. And they did get several states' laws struck down. Iowa then just passed a new law.
Ag-gag 2.0, a bipartisan bill trying again to stop people from lying to get onto farms.
These groups are exposing issues that are happening.
If they really cared about animals, they would stop it right then. Instead, they go weeks and months without reporting anything to the farm owners.
That's true. This investigation went on for months. Agricultural groups are now pushing laws that would force activists to report abuse quickly. Why don't they?
They want to make their movie. They want to make their sensational video.
It's because they care about the animals that they want to show that that's something that happens every day on these farms.
Consistent, constant abuse.
A company can say, this is a one-off. This is not just discrete actors. This is company policy.
They say they don't want to just correct the abuse on that farm. They want to change all farming practices.
What they really want is to stop people from eating meat, milk, and eggs.
Do you want people to stop eating meat?
I want people to act in their conscience.
But you didn't really answer the question. Do you want people to stop eating meat or eggs?
I think that, again, Are we asking me personally, or are we asking the Animal Legal Defense Fund?
She never did give a direct answer.
Workers at the turkey farm abusing the birds.
Animal rights activists have exposed things that need exposing.
Walmart now taking a stand when it comes to the treatment of farm-raised animals.
How else would you have made these changes without sneaking into your farms?
Well, that's to say that farmers can't be trusted, and I think that
apparently in the past, some could not.
There are bad apples in every industry. However, I would say 99.9% of farmers in America, they do the right thing every single day. Farming isn't always pretty.
People have some right to privacy, no?
I think we should all be worried when corporations are supporting laws that impinge our right to free speech.
We should worry. Whatever you think of the activists, and I have problems with many of them, government shouldn't pass special laws that prevent people from revealing what's true.
The city of Seattle made history on Monday when it raised the minimum wage.
The highest in the nation by far.
5 years ago, Seattle became the first city to pass a $15 minimum wage.
I think it's pretty awesome since I benefit from it.
A rising tide raises all boats.
15 in Seattle is just a beginning. We have an entire world to win. Solidarity.
When the law passed, we went to Seattle to interview people about it.
It's a good thing that we're leading the way for the rest of the country.
I wish that it was all over the place, not just Seattle.
Increasingly, it is.
New York State taking steps towards a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Other states and lots of cities have copied Seattle.
California Governor Jerry Brown signed a $15 minimum wage bill.
But now the results from Seattle are in. Some people are being paid more. They're the winners. But for many people who wanted jobs,
the increased minimum wage is having an opposite effect.
Costing thousands of jobs and actually hurting low-income workers.
You see it on this graph. The green line tracks the number of new jobs created in Washington state. The red line is new jobs in Seattle. Once Seattle raised its minimum to $15, entry-level job growth stalled.
It's really presented by minimum wage advocates as a win-win. It's a win-win for employers. It's a win-win for workers. And, you know, there are no negatives.
But there are negatives, says Erin Shannon of the Washington Policy Center. She points to stores like this one, where the owner used to hire kids and train them. But once Seattle raised the minimum, she stopped hiring beginners.
The politicians in Seattle especially have no sense whatsoever about what it means to small businesses like us.
Most people we interviewed said the politicians are right.
Yes, some people will go out of business, others will take their place.
It's something we need to do.
It's as if they've never learned about supply and demand.
Minimum wage actually hurts my chances of getting employed.
This 20-year-old understands the effect better than Seattle's politicians did.
Raising the minimum wage causes increased unemployment.
Rigel Novakoza is one of the $1,500 winners of a video contest done by my classroom charity.
My name is Dylan Hodes, and this is my Wage Rage.
Dylan Hodes won the high school video contest. He mentioned a friend who worked at Kroger until her store raised its minimum to $12.
She was getting paid $12 an hour, but slowly but surely they started cutting her days, her hours. She was regulated to only working on Sundays, and that's because she was young and inexperienced. I feel the big thing...
She wasn't worth $12.
She wasn't worth $12 to Kroger. She's worth the world to me, but she wasn't worth $12 to Kroger.
I learned things from their videos, like how many wealthy countries have no minimum wage.
Countries such as Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Switzerland.
Nobody knows that.
No, and especially with Switzerland.
Which has much lower unemployment than America, partly because Switzerland has no minimum.
It stops us from actually getting a job.
Esther Rhodes won the high school essay contest. Her essay pointed out that America's first minimum wage laws were racist. At the time, blacks were often paid less, but they were more likely to be employed than whites.
The whites were like, hey, they're getting all the jobs. This isn't fair.
Congressman Olgin said he hoped the minimum wage would stop cheap colored labor in competition with white labor. So although Americans think the minimum was invented to help needy people,
it was meant for the opposite, to keep the poor and the minorities from getting jobs.
And today it still keeps entry-level workers from finding work. But the politicians don't understand the downside.
Lift up the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour.
Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
It's easy to see why a higher minimum wage is so popular.
On the surface, you think, oh, this is a great idea.
Because it raises some people's wages.
Everybody deserves a living wage.
But while it helps some, it harms many others, especially young people who may now not be offered their first job.
I'm 14, it'd be very difficult for me to find a job. My labor wouldn't be worth $15 an hour.
If only politicians were as smart as those kids.
Paid family leave. It's what moments like these are all about.
Do you support a nationwide paid parental leave policy?
Absolutely, and even more.
Politicians always want government to do more. Now they want to force companies to give every parent paid time off.
Every worker in America should be guaranteed at least 12 weeks.
Every worker should get at least 12 weeks.
Why 12 weeks? That's a very arbitrary number. Why not 14 weeks? Why not 26 weeks?
Anwuka's a working mom.
Bonding time between a mom and a baby is important.
When she had her son, her employer, the Independent Women's Forum, gave her 6 weeks paid leave, but she wanted more time off.
I supplemented those 6 weeks with additional time off, some vacation time. This is my baby boy, Jesse. It was wonderful to have that time off, but it's also important for me to be able to customize the time off that I needed.
Government programs, however, are hard to customize. But now both parties are pushing government solutions.
This is not a woman's issue. It's a family issue.
And America, say people like John Oliver, is way behind the world.
We and Papua New Guinea are the only countries in the world that do not provide any paid time off.
Just us and Papua New Guinea.
So it's disingenuous to say, we're the only nation along with Papua New Guinea.
Because most American workers already get paid leave. 17% get parental leave.
But you jump to 60, 70, 80% when you consider people have sick time off, overtime, or an all-encompassing personal time.
So companies and workers are already kind of working this out voluntarily.
They are. Paid leave is spreading.
And not just for high-paid employees.
We're talking about Chipotle workers, CVS workers, Walmart workers started to get paid leave.
Why would CVS and Walmart provide this voluntarily?
For an employer to attract good talent or retain their talent, they need to offer benefits that really resonate with workers. Paid maternity and paternity leave is one of those benefits.
It'll be good for business.
Politicians are so arrogant that they say they must tell business what's good for business.
Good for business is good for this country.
In truth, it's bad for business and not even good for most women.
If we look at how the rest of the world has provided very generous paid leave, mandated paid leave plans, we see that it actually has a negative impact on women.
Why would that be? Because mandatory leave makes young women a hiring risk.
If an employer has a young woman in front of him of childbearing age, and he's thinking, okay, I have to provide paid time off for this young woman, or I have a potential other employee who's a male.
The male becomes a safer bet. And sure enough, in California, the first state to mandate paid family leave, a study found women of childbearing age were more likely to be unemployed. And in Europe, lots of women do work, but in lower level jobs.
American women are more likely to be in senior level positions, managerial positions, than women in Europe.
Twice as likely?
Twice as likely. And it's very much tied to these mandates around paid leave and paid time off.
On top of all that, our politicians understate the cost.
It's such a small amount of money. It's the cost of a cup of coffee a week.
About $1.61 a year.
But that's not true. In California, the cost is already $12 a week. And government programs always grow.
There's a push to add a huge extension to paid parental leave in California.
Mission creep always happens with government programs. All of a sudden, that $12 goes to $24, $36, $48.
So can't we just say parental leave is something best left to employers and employees? Leave them free to make their own deals. Probably not, I'm sad to report, because now even politicians who call themselves conservatives want government to do something.
As conservatives, we're pro-family.
He and some other Republicans support a bill called the Cradle Act.
The Cradle Act would allow new parents to tap into their Social Security savings.
At least the Republican plan is not mandatory.
Anyone can choose whether or not to participate in the program.
Here's Onwuka at the press conference showing her support. Already Social Security is unsustainable. Now you're going to break it open for paid leave?
But it's not a growth of government. What's interesting about this plan...
Yes, it is. You're tapping your Social Security. There'll be a new bureaucracy to monitor it.
It's not a new entitlement. It's not a new bureaucracy. It is literally just allowing workers to tap into Social Security benefits that they're already paying for.
So when they're older, there'll be less in their Social Security fund, and there won't be enough money, and we'll have to raise taxes again.
Older workers or retirees have more resources when they retire. Younger workers are the ones who have lower incomes.
Give me a break. Can't we ever say there's something that's not government's job? We're already $22 trillion in debt. We don't need another government program.
The Tom Woods Show, episode 1273.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey, all you homeschooling parents out there, I'm recording this the very beginning of November 2018, and you may be thinking to yourselves, well, it's too far into the school year for me to change homeschooling programs now, so we'll just have to slog through it. If that's how you feel, go ahead and chuck that labor-intensive homeschool program you've got and join the self-taught Ron Paul curriculum through my link, where you get $160 worth of free bonuses. Check it out at ronpaulhomeschool.com. Hey everybody, Tom Woods here. I thought I would turn on the microphone today and say a little something about this birthright citizenship question. And just as I was sitting down to do it, I got an alert on my phone from an app that I guess is built in on the Android called Newsroom. I certainly didn't put this stupid thing on there. And every once in a while, it'll send me a headline. Maybe a couple of times a day, something important happens and I get a headline. And then I can click on it and read the whole story. I, every once in a while, see them send me a headline about a I guess the guy's name is Matt Bai, B-A-I, over at Yahoo. And so they'll actually send me, as if it's a breaking story, an opinion piece that he wrote. So it'll be, Yahoo's Matt Bai says Donald Trump blah, 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 blah. Like that's some kind of breaking news. Or Yahoo's Matt Bai says U.S. policy on housing should be blah, blah, blah. So in other words, some blowhard has a totally predictable opinion. Yes, stop the presses. Make sure and send out a text alert to everybody about that. Well, just as I'm sitting down to record this episode about birthright citizenship, here's the headline that was just sent to me via this newsroom app. President Trump dismisses a century of constitutional scholarship in bid to end birthright citizenship. Now, that headline could have read, President Trump seeks to return to original understanding in bid to end birthright citizenship. You see what I did? You could just as easily have published that headline. So right away, we know it's hostile. We know that the source is hostile because it did not have to be written that way. But there it is. All right, so let's talk about so-called birthright citizenship, the idea that if you're born on U.S. soil, you are automatically a citizen, even if your parents are citizens of some other country, and even if your parents brought you to the country illegally, you're just automatically a citizen. Is that the case, or is this some kind of libertarian principle that we ought to uphold? I certainly hope nobody's advocating that. You can argue about whether the president can institute this policy via executive order. You can argue whether this is what the 14th Amendment intended, but the idea that this would be some kind of libertarian principle is really too much. And the very idea of citizenship wouldn't even exist in a stateless society. So right away, obviously libertarians can't be wedded to this. The idea that everybody's got to be a citizen of the place where they're born as opposed to a citizen of the place where their parents reside. I mean, for crying out loud, what's the libertarian question at stake there? Of course, there isn't one. So we can't let our prejudices in one direction or the other cloud our historical judgment here. What exactly did the 14th Amendment, which everybody points to on this, have to say on this question? Well, it's true that at that time, there really wasn't so-called illegal immigration. So people weren't thinking in those terms. But we can tell from what they wrote and said what they were thinking. And the key clause here involves the words subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Let me read the whole thing. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. All right. Well, what does that mean? I mean, this is primarily meant to respond to the Dred Scott decision of 1857 that concluded that blacks could not be citizens. So this replies to that. But what does that subject to the jurisdiction thereof, what does that mean? I saw a fairly intelligent libertarian in my Facebook feed say the other day that this obviously means that anybody at all. It obviously applies to basically everybody in the U.S. because, look, if you weren't subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S., why, you could just go on a crime spree. And since you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S., nobody could stop you. Well, we know nobody has the right to go on a crime spree in the U.S., so that goes to show everybody is subject to the jurisdiction of the U.S. And I was so disappointed to read that kind of nonsense from a libertarian because I just have high expectations of libertarians. I think libertarians are people who somehow came to highly, highly unorthodox conclusions, even though they were basically propagandized into believing the exact opposite pretty much from birth. And so I have great respect for my fellow libertarians. How did you ever arrive at the views you hold now? And it's by refusal just to take things on faith and a desire to get to the bottom of things and not just to jump onto some kind of propaganda bandwagon. So that's deeply disappointing. What exactly does that phrase mean? Because, of course, that interpretation renders the phrase completely nugatory. You have to assume there's a reason that it's there. And it's not just to talk about the children of foreign diplomats. I mean, for heaven's sake, you look at the vanishingly small number of those, it wouldn't even be worth mentioning. So what exactly did it mean? What it meant was that you don't owe allegiance to any other sovereign. Then you are fully subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. But if you do owe, so for example, this is part of the reason that in the original understanding before 1924, that American Indians were said not to be American citizens, because they're not fully subject to the jurisdiction thereof. They have, to some degree anyway, some tribal sovereignty. And so this was thought to exclude them from American citizenship. Now then they, as I said, they changed that later through legislative means. But that was the understanding that led to the conclusion that they were not citizens. You cannot be subject to any other sovereign. So let me just read you some quotations backing up what I'm saying. We look at advocates of the 14th Amendment, major figures, advocates, drafters of the amendment, all make this fairly clear. So Senator Lyman Trumbull, for example, said, "What do we mean by these words?" And he says, "Not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means." And then we have John Bingham, Congressman John Bingham of Ohio, who's more or less the drafter of the 14th Amendment, said this, that the introductory clause of the amendment is simply declaratory of what is written in the Constitution, that every human being born within the jurisdiction of the United States, of parents not owing allegiance to any foreign sovereignty, is, in the language of your Constitution itself, a natural-born citizen. Aha. So not owing allegiance to any foreign sovereignty. Then one of the primary architects of the Citizenship Clause, the highly pro-14th Amendment U.S. Senator Jacob Howard, said this about the subject to the jurisdiction thereof. He said, "This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons." So it will not include persons born in the United States who are foreigners. So I think that more or less settles that particular question. Then I was listening to Kevin Gutzman, my co-author on Who Killed the Constitution, in an appearance he made a night or two ago on the Lars Larson show, and they were talking about this precise issue. And Kevin pointed out the statute, 8 U.S.C. 1401, that more or less repeats the language of the 14th Amendment, including subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And he says it's been basically executive misapplication of this language that's led to the current situation. So if executives can misapply this language, Kevin says, I'm not exactly sure what would stop the president from changing this order and saying, for example, to the State Department, don't issue passports or related documents to anybody who's not a natural-born citizen, as understood by the plain meaning of these words, and obviously the intention behind these words. If the president can interpret them obviously wrongly, I mean, obviously at odds with the intention behind them, there's no multiple interpretations of the passages I just read to you, then why couldn't the president turn around and reverse that on constitutional grounds? I don't get what would stop him. I mean, in practical terms, what would stop him is there'd be outrage and they wouldn't let him do it. But in principle, I don't see what the big deal is, that people are saying he's acting like a dictator. But this is actually something that would slightly take power away from the government, because it would reduce the number of people eligible for coercively acquired benefits. So that's a net positive. But it seems to me this is what an executive order is supposed to do. It's supposed to direct executive agencies to take particular actions. And yes, this goes against long-standing interpretation of the amendment, but okay, that interpretation was wrong, was self-serving and wrong. So if they can, through executive power, carry out the misunderstanding of the words, why could you not? Again, I'm not saying could he get away with it. I'm saying in principle, why could you not equally through executive power say, no, we're going to restore the original meaning of the words? That part of it, I'm not really getting the outrage. Now, on this topic, I'm going to link at tomwoods.com/1273 to an article from National Affairs in fall 2018 called The Question of Birthright Citizenship by two legal scholars, one from Yale and one from the University of Pennsylvania, so elite schools. And they wrote a book on this subject back in 1985, published by Yale University Press, called Citizenship Without Consent, Illegal Aliens in the American Polity. And they, in this current article, address the current controversy. And these are people whose political sympathies are not at all with Trump or with ending birthright citizenship at all, which makes their testimony all the more interesting and intriguing, because they say that really the Constitution does not actually call for this. There's also a passage from a Rothbard article where he talks a bit about birthright citizenship and says this is obviously a bad idea because it's obviously going to be a welfare magnet. And you're not supposed to say that. I understand you're not supposed to say that. But just think of natural incentives. I mean, for crying out loud, we talk about economics all the time. We don't understand incentives. You could come here and be eligible for far more in benefits than you ever would be in your home country. That's an incentive. It's not just big businesses that have incentives to collect subsidies. It's everybody. And there's a reason that Ron Paul has been against birthright citizenship. And Rand Paul, years ago, back in 2011, came out swinging against birthright citizenship. It's a subsidy. It is a subsidy to immigration. If you want immigration, that's one thing. But if you want subsidized immigration, that's quite another. And obviously, birthright citizenship skews the calculus when it comes to immigration. So it should be gotten rid of. And the historical and constitutional arguments against it are pretty convincing. In fact, this article that I mentioned in National Affairs, again by scholars eminently qualified to speak on this, having written an Ivy League published book, both being Ivy League professors, and frankly, having a kind of sympathy for birthright citizenship, they nevertheless say that if an unauthorized alien gives birth to a child on American soil, is the child automatically a United States citizen? Americans have long assumed that the answer is yes, that the child is a birthright citizen regardless of the parent's legal status, and that such citizenship is required and guaranteed by the Constitution. But a closer examination of the matter suggests that this answer is actually incorrect. So that's pretty much all I have to say on this subject. All right, that's it. As I said, at that page, I will also link to that National Affairs article, so you can see I'm not just making stuff up here. This is actually not a particularly outrageous position to hold. And by the way, I was very surprised to see the New York Times have, I think his name is John Eastman, writing on this topic, taking the anti-birthright citizenship position in the New York Times as part of a debate. And I just thought he was decisive. So I'll try and remember to link to that also at tomwoods.com/1273. Thanks for listening.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
We know that our country is divided, but I think we're using an old template to describe how it's divided. I stopped using the word liberal a long time ago because there's nothing liberal about the left. They oppose free speech, free thought, free markets, freedom of religion. The only freedoms they support are the unbridled fulfillments of physical desires, which are guaranteed to turn you into a dependent slave. So I call them leftists now, but maybe leftist isn't quite right either. It's kind of an old-fashioned word to describe a European phenomenon. And what about conservatives? Are we really conservative? Well, we're sort of conservative, but in America, conservatives aren't about blood and soil or even really about tradition necessarily, except insofar as our traditions preserve our essential American ideas. Unlike conservatives in other nations, American conservatives are trying to conserve the most radical political document ever written, the Constitution, which guarantees a limited government of specified powers tasked with guaranteeing the individual's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that's not really conservative in the usual sense of the word. In fact, what I think we're seeing is a division between friends of that founding and enemies of that founding. Those of us who believe the creation of the United States in the image of our Declaration and Constitution is the greatest political event in history and therefore worth saving, and those who think, no, we should return to the age-old habit of top-down government or race-based identity politics rather than the radical politics based on our founding ideas. You can tell friends of the founding because they talk about founding ideals. They quote Jefferson, they quote Madison, Adams, Franklin. They wrestle with the original intentions of the Constitution and the underlying principles of the Declaration. We can have passionate but civilized debates about whether a new idea, like gay rights, is antithetical to those founding intentions or, in fact, in keeping with them. Because we have source materials and writings and foundational ideas, we can compare our arguments and then move ahead, abandoning out-of-date practices or clinging to those practices that still hold true to the founding. But the anti-founders, they got nothing. All they have is an amorphous sense of their own glowing compassion, tolerance, and virtue. So they use empty phrases like, "that's not who we are," which literally means nothing. They invent mean-sounding words like Islamophobia or transphobia, which describe utterly non-existent phenomena. Nobody's phobic about transgender people or Islamic people. They just want to demonize legitimate concerns about whether violence is inherent in Islamic theology and whether so-called sexual identity is eating away at morality and even sanity. They address issues of high emotion and zero importance, like use of pronouns or abortion rights for girls who are actually guys. They're guided and manipulated by emotive pictures on the left-wing news. Babies dying at the border is a crisis, but babies dying in Chicago, not so much. Most of all, the enemies of the founding define everything that opposes them as hate. Of course they do. Since they're defined by their love and their virtue, anyone who's against them must be hateful and therefore can be opposed by any means necessary. So the enemies of the founding call the friends of the founding not just wrong, but evil, and they license their own evil in the process. They call us hateful while they obviously seethe with hate. They call us violent while they assault us and scream at us and spit on us in restaurants. They call us racist while they see everything in terms of race. And they call us fascist while they try to undermine every freedom our founding defends. Momentary issues and the huge presence of Donald Trump distract us from the essential nature of this division. But in each issue, each crisis, each argument, it's important to remember what exactly we're fighting for so we can defeat these forces of violence and hate.
My favorite animal is the manatee, the sea cow. Have you ever seen that animal? The manatee is endangered, and I think it's because it's out of shape. It looks like a retired football player. You ever seen it on the Discovery Channel? It's always floating around like, "I'm bloated. Too much pizza." And the manatee is also called the sea cow. I mean, that kind of sounds like an insult. It's almost as if the manatee was introduced to the ocean. The other animals were like, "Who's the new guy?" And the manatee was like, "Oh, hi, everyone. You can call me the manatee." "You're all right, sea cow." "Name's Manatee, fellas." "Sea cow, fast." Doesn't the manatee kind of look like a guest on the Ricky Lake show? Manatee be like, "Ricky, I'm here because I'm endangered." And then one of those mean people in the audience would offer up the advice, "Yeah, I want to say something to the sea pig." "That's sea cow." "Whatever." "Sea pig, you got to get yourself an education and a job." "I live in the ocean." "It just so happened you live in the ocean because you ain't got no job." "I don't know what you're..." "You got to get in Weight Watchers, some kind of program." "I have a layer of blubber to keep my body warm in the water." "Whatever, talk to my hand."